Hey y'all, it's Miss Flores. So today we're going to continue with estimating quotients, but now instead of dividing by one-digit numbers, we're going to divide by two-digit numbers. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to review with estimating quotients with one digits like we did yesterday. We're just going to review that really quick. So here I've got 513 divided by 8, and I've also got 1,985 divided by 6. So let's try this one first. So remember, we split our problem into two, right? I'm wanting to figure out my estimate, and I round up and I round down using compatible numbers. So if I look, I'm going to start dividing by 8. Well, 8 can't go into 5, but it can go into 51, right? So 51 is what I'm using to round to find my compatible number. Yesterday we were using a multiplication chart. You can still use a multiplication chart today, but I'm going to go ahead and continue without one. So I'm going to think about my multiples of 8 that are right below 51 and right above 51. So one of my below 51 would be 48, right? 48, right? So I'd have 48 divided by 8. But remember, that 3 right there, we did not use it. We did not use it to estimate, right? So instead, it's going to drop off and become a 0. So I add that 0 to the end of my problem. So I end up with 480 divided by 8. And just like yesterday, I can use mental math to solve this. Well, 48 divided by 8 is 6. And then that 0 I didn't use is going to float up into my answer. So I end up with 480 divided by 8 is 60. Now, let's think about our estimation, but we're going to go a little bit above 51. Our next multiple of 8 would be 56, correct? So I would have 56 divided by 8. But just like before, remember this was 513, right? So it's not just going to be 56, it's going to be 560, because I'm going to add my 0 to the end, right? Because that 3 I didn't use, and it becomes a 0 at the end of my two numbers. So now I'm going to use mental math to solve. Well, 56 divided by 8 is 7. And I have that 0 I didn't use, so it floats up into my answer. So I have 560 divided by 8 is 70. Now I'm going to come up with my best estimate by figuring out what number was closest to 51 when we were estimating, right? Well, 48 is 3 away from 51. 56 is 5 away. So my best estimate would be 480 divided by 8 is 60. So 60 would be my best estimate for this problem. Now, let's try it again with 1,985 divided by 6. So we're going to go this way. So I'm dividing by 6, so I have to think about what are my compatible numbers with 6. What are my multiples of 6? Well, when I'm dividing, 6 can go into 1, but it could go into 19, right? So 19 is what I'm using to start off basing my compatible numbers around. So I have to think about what is my multiple of 6 that's below 19, right below 19, and what are my multiples of 6 that are right above 19? Well, below 19 would be 18, right? But remember, I had this 8 and this 5 that I didn't use, so those are going to drop off and become zeros. So I'm going to add those zeros to the end of my 18, and I end up with 1,800. So 1,800 divided by 6, I can do that using mental math, right? 18 divided by 6 was 3. And then I have those two zeros I didn't use, so they float up into my answer, and I end up with 300. 1,800 divided by 6 is 300. Now, my multiple of 6 that's right above 19, that would be 24. But I have those zeros that I didn't use, right? That 8, that 5 became 0, so I add 2 zeros to the end, and I end up with 2,400 divided by 6. Well, 6 can't go into 2, but it goes into 24 4 times. And those 2 zeros that I didn't use float up into my answer. So I end up with 2,400 divided by 6 is equal to 400. So now I got to pick my best estimate, just like before, right? We used 19 to base our compatible numbers around, so I'm going to pick the number that was closest to 19 that we used. Well, we used 18 and 24, right? 18 is 1 away, 24 is 5 away, so 18 is going to be the closest. So 1,800 divided by 6 is equal to 300 is going to be my best estimate. So 300 is going to be my best estimated answer. And that was estimating with estimating our quotients. Now we're going to try that exact same thing, but instead of dividing by one number, we're going to be dividing by a 2-digit number. So now we've got 1,353 divided by 60. So I'm going to start, since my 60 ends in 0, I'm going to start by, just doing it just like we were, right? I'm going to pay attention to my 6. My 6 and 60. That's the number that I'm going to be using to divide by, using for my compatible numbers. So just like before, I can't go into 1, but 6 can go into 13. So that's what I'm going to be basing my compatible numbers around. I'm going to think about a number that is close to 6, a number that is a multiple of 6 that's a little bit below 13, and a number that's a multiple of 6 that's a little bit above 13. So let's try that out. So I've got, for my first one, well, 12 is a multiple of 6, right? And it's right below 13. So 12 is going to be my first number. I did not use that 5 or 0 or 3, so they are going to become zeros that I attach to the end of my number. So I end up with 1,200 divided by 60. So this I can solve using mental math. But I'm just paying attention to the 12 and the 6 right now. So 6 can go into 12 2 complete times, right? Now, here's the thing. I'm going to cross out the zeros that are on both sides. So I've got a 0 right here, right? I'm not using that 0. So I'm going to, for every 0 that I have in my divisor, which in our case will be 1, it's going to cross out a 0 in my dividend. So that is going to cancel out those zeros, and I end up with 1 0 that is going to float into my answer, which is going to be right here. So I end up with 1,200 divided by 60 is 20. So now let's try that with our upper estimate. So thinking about a multiple of 6 that's just above 13, my next multiple of 6 that's above 13 would be 18. So 18, but I had that 5 and 3 that crossed out and became 0, so I'm going to add those to the end of my number, and I end up with 1,800 divided by 60. So now, same thing. I'm looking at my numbers that aren't 0 right now, which would be 18 and 6. Well, 6 can go into 18 3 whole times, right? And now I'm going to cancel out zeros that I can. I've got a 0 here. That will cancel out a 0 here. Now I've got 1 lone 0 that is going to float up into my answer, making it 30. So 1,800 divided by 60 was 30. Now, to pick my best estimate, I'm going to pick the number that was closest to 13, right? 13 was what we based our compatible numbers around. Well, I had 12, which was 1 away, and I had 18, which was 5 away. So 12 is going to be my closest, which means 1,200 divided by 60 is equal to 20 is going to be my best estimate. So 20 is going to be my best estimated answer. All right, let's do a few more together. So now, let's say, here I've got 2. We're using compatible numbers to estimate each quotient. So now, if you notice, 52 and 38, those are what I'm dividing by on those 2 problems. They don't end in zeros. So, when I have that happen, I'm going to round my number, my divisor, to the tens place. So if I've got 52, that 52 is going to round down to 50, right? That 52 is closer to 50 than it is to 60. And this 38 is going to round up to 40, because 38 is closer to 40 than it is to 30. And so now those are what I'm going to be using for my compatible numbers. So now I'm going to pay attention to my number that isn't 0. So that would be 5. 5 is what I'm thinking about for my compatible numbers. Well, 5 couldn't go into 4, but it can go into 41. So now I'm going to think about my multiples of 5 that are right below 41 and right above 41. Well, a multiple of 5 that's right below 41 is going to be 40. But I had this 5 that I wasn't using, so that's going to cross out and become a 0, and I'm going to add that 0 to the end of my 40. So I end up with 400. So I end up with 400 divided by 50. So now, I'm going to pay attention to my 5 and my 40. Well, 5 goes into 48 complete times. And now I'm going to cross out any common zeros I have. I've got a 0 here I didn't use, and I've got this 0 here that I didn't use. I now don't have any extra zeros to add into my answer. So my answer is just 8. Now, let's try our estimate that was above 41. So our next multiple of 5 that's above 41 is going to be 45. But remember, we had that 0 that we need to add to the end of our number, so we end up with 450. So now my problem is 450 divided by 50. So I'm going to pay attention to 45 divided by 5. Well, 5 goes into 45 9 whole times. And now I cross out any zeros that I might be able to cross out. Well, there's a 0 here I didn't use, and a 0 here I didn't use. There are not any leftover zeros, so I do not carry any zeros into my answer. Now, to pick my best estimate, I'm looking for the number that's closest to 41, because that's what I was using for my compatible numbers, right? Well, 40 is 1 away, 45 is 4 away, so 40 is going to be my best answer. So that means 400 divided by 50 is equal to 8 is going to be my best estimate, so 8 is going to be my best estimated answer. Now, let's try $2,764 divided by 40 when we rounded it, right? That 38 rounded to 40. So 4 is what I'm paying attention to for my compatible numbers, right? We don't all know the multiples of 40. So I'm paying attention to that 4. Well, 4 can't go into 2, but it can go into 27. So 27 is going to be what I'm going to base my compatible numbers around. I'm going to think of a multiple of 4 that's just below 27 and a multiple of 4 that's just above 27. Well, below, let's have this go over here. Well, below 27 would be 24. 24. But then I had this 6 and that 4 that I didn't use. They are going to become zeros that are then added to the end of my 24. So I end up with 2,400. 2,400 divided by 40. So now I'm going to think about 24 divided by 4. Well, 4 goes into 24 6 whole times, right? 6 whole times. So now I'm left to cross out any zeros that I'm able to. Well, there's a 0 in 40 I didn't use. There's an extra 0 in 2,400 I didn't use. Well, now I've got this 0 that I couldn't cross out. Remember, they can only cross out in pairs. So that 0 I couldn't cross out goes up into my answer, and I end up with 60 as my answer. So 2,400 divided by 40 was 60. So now let's try our estimate that's going to be a little bit above. So our estimate that's above 27, our compatible number that's above 27, that's a multiple of 4, is going to be 28. 28 is going to be my next number. 28. But I have those 2 zeros at the end, so I end up with 2,800. 2,800 divided by 40. So I'm going to pay attention to my 28 divided by 4. 28 divided by 4 is 7. So now let's cross out any zeros that we're able to pair off. So this 0 I did not use is going to cross out this 0 that I did not use. So now I'm left with 1 0 that couldn't be crossed out. That 0 goes into my answer, and I end up with 70 as my answer. So 2,800 divided by 40 is equal to 70. Now to pick our best estimate, I'm looking for the number that is closest to 27. So my numbers were 24 and 28. 24 was 3 away. 28 was 1 away. So 28 or 2,800 is going to be my best estimate. So 2,800 divided by 40 is equal to 70 is going to be my best estimate. So 70 is going to be my best estimated answer. All right, let's try this one. We're going to use compatible numbers to estimate our quotient in this. I've got 503 divided by 68. So first thing, I'm going to round my 68. I'm going to round my divisor. My 68 is going to round up to 70. 68 is closer to 70 than it is to 60. So that means that I'm going to be thinking about my multiples of 7 for my compatible numbers. So when I am going to think about my compatible numbers, 7 couldn't go into 5, but it can go into 50. So 50 is what I'm going to use for my compatible numbers. I'm going to pick my multiples of 7 that are just below 50 and right above 50. Well, just below 50 would be 49. Right? 7 times 7 is 49. Well, this is 3 I didn't use is going to cross out, and I'm going to add that as a 0 to the end of my numbers because I'm rounding. When I'm rounding, everything behind it becomes a 0, right? So I end up with 490 as my rounded compatible number. So 490 divided by 70. So I'm going to look at 49 divided by 7. So 49 divided by 7 is 7. Now I get to cross out my zeros if I have pairs of zeros that I can cross out. Well, I've got 1 0 and 70 that I didn't use. That is going to cancel out 1 0 and 490. Now I don't have any zeros left over to put in my answer, so my answer is just 7. Now let's think about my next compatible number. So 49 was my low end. The next compatible number for 70 would be 56, because 7 times 8 is 56. But that 3 had turned into a 0 right when I rounded, so I got to add that 0 to the end of my number. And I end up with 560 divided by 70. So I'm going to pay attention to 56 divided by 7. 56 divided by 7 is 8. Exactly. And now I am ready to cross out any zeros that can cancel each other out. Well, I've got a 0 here that is going to cancel out my 0 here. And now I don't have any other zeros that I can add into my answer or that can cancel out. So my answer is just 8. Now, to pick our best estimate, I want to pick the number that is closest to 50. So my compatible numbers, I had 49, which is 1 away, and I had 56, which is 6 away. So 49 is going to be the closest. So that means my best estimate is going to be 490 divided by 70 is equal to 7. So 7 is my best estimated answer. All right, let's do one more together. We've got 7,052 divided by 81. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to round my 81 to the tens place because I want it to be either, 80, 90, 100. I want it to be an easy multiple of 10 number. Well, 81 would round down to 80 because 81 is closer to 80 than it is to 90. And now I'm going to pay attention to that 8 for my compatible numbers, right? So now 8 couldn't go into 7, but it could go into 70. So now I'm going to think about my multiples of 7, not 7, my multiples of 8 that are directly below 70 and directly above 70. So now my multiples of 8 that would be right below 70 would be 64. Because 8 times 8 is 64. But I had that 5 and that 2 that I did not use. And so they're going to become 2 zeros at the end of each of my numbers. So I end up with 6,400. So 6,400 divided by, oh, let me get black. I cannot see on that. Divided by 80. So for my division, I'm going to think about 64 divided by 8. Well, 64, 8 goes into 64 8 whole times. And now I'm going to cancel out my zeros. Well, I've got a 0 here that's going to cancel out a 0 on this side. And then I have one leftover 0. That leftover 0 is going to go into my answer. And I end up with 80. So 6,400 divided by 80 is equal to 80. Now, for my high estimate, so 64 was below 70. My next compatible number is going to be above 70, right? So my next number would be 72 because 8 times 9 is 72. But I had the 5 and the 2 that would just become zeros in my number. So I have to add those 2 zeros at the end. And I end up with 7,200 divided by 80. So I'm going to pay attention to 72 and 8 and think about how many times can 8 go into 72. Well, 8 can go into 72 9 whole times. And now I can cross out any zeros that I'm able to. Well, this 0 is going to cancel out this 0, right? They cancel out in pairs in each number. So these 2 zeros in 7,200 would never cancel each other out. It's got to be, they cancel out different numbers when I'm dividing. So the 0 and 80 canceled out one of the zeros in 7,200, leaving me with 1 0 left that's going to float into my answer. So I end up with 7,200 divided by 80 is equal to 90. Now, we've got to pick our best estimate. So my original number was 70. That's what based my compatible numbers around. I had 64, which is 6 away. I had 72, which is 2 away. 72 is the closest, so it's going to give me the most accurate answer. So I ended up with 7,200 divided by 80 is equal to 90 as my best estimated equation. So 90 would be my best estimated answer. So that is estimating quotients with 2-digit divisors. So the key thing is to round your divisor first. Round your divisor to the tens place. And then you're going to look at its digit in the tens place. So in our case, this was 8. You're going to look at that digit to determine your compatible numbers just like before. The only extra step is rounding your divisor and then canceling out zeros if you can. So you have the remainder questions that look like this. So the ones with the snakes on it, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you do have a few multiple choice questions. Those questions are for y'all to try on your own after watching this video. We will go over most of these together in our Google Meets later on today. So please make sure that you are watching the whole video. If you needed to pause and check something real quick, do that. And you can use it as extra help while you're working on these problems. So let me know if y'all have any questions, and I will see y'all later. Have a great day. Bye.